Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Twice as Lively with Ken Heckenlively. That would be me. As always, I have my Pete's Coffee here. My regular order is a Cafe Americano with a little bit of room for cream and some honey. Because, we all need a little bit of sugar with our caffeine. So get your beverage ready for that simultaneous sip. What fun we're going to have today. The title of today's episode, 3 Rules for Debating Candace Owens. 3 rules for debating Candace Owens. And I would argue 3 rules for debating anybody. Yes, we're going to be talking about that train wreck of a debate between Candace Owens and Andrew Wilson, and all the things that Andrew Wilson did wrong. But then I'm actually going to surprise you by disagreeing at the end with Candace and suggesting there's a point of view that she may not have considered yet. And I think it may explain things to a good part of the conservative media. And so I'm hopeful that I will be given the respect to hear my point of view. But before we go to that, let's first have our simultaneous sip. I've got my adult beverage here. It is just a little before 11:30 on the West Coast, which means that it's socially inappropriate for me to be drinking alcohol at this time. Or if you are any place in the continental United States. However, if you choose to have alcohol during the day, I'm not going to judge you because we're not judgy here. And, well, there may be some things that we are judgy are. Now, as I see you there, I have to say to myself, you look really good. Have you lost a little bit of weight? Have you been working out? Have you gone on a diet? Because you're looking really good. Okay, here we go with that simultaneous sip. That caffeine hits the brain, lubricates the throat, so that if I have any problems with speaking, they'll be taken care of relatively quickly. Okay, 3 rules for debating Candace Owens or anyone. Rule number 1, don't be a dick. That was the first rule that Andrew Wilson violated. How did he violate that? Well, when Candace asked him the question of how he can be such a strong supporter of Erica Kirk, given that he sent out a tweet calling her essentially a moron, his response was, well, I think all women are morons. That's a dick. All right? Webster's Dictionary needs to have Andrew Wilson's picture in its definition of a dick, because only a dick says that all women are morons. So you could have ended the 3-hour debate right there. Anybody who is so stupid to go on a broadcast and say all women are morons will forever afterwards be known by me as the dick. Don't do that. That's just bad. Rule number 2. Know the facts of the case so well. You don't have to hold your little iPhone up there and read a statement. If you spent $300,000 to get on the stage with Candace Owens, learn the fucking case. All right, know the facts. Rule number 3, and this can be difficult because many people struggle with this. As an attorney myself, having passed the bar in 1990, I understood there was this concept known as best evidence. What is the best evidence in this case? The best evidence is what the court has put out at this time. And so that is what Candace Owens, to her credit, is responding to. I got together with a good friend the other day who, I say is a very bright guy, but he's kind of a normie. And so I feel like I'm always trying to enlighten him to a more skeptical perspective. And he had talked about, the Candace Owens, Charlie Kirk issue. Isn't she being kind of crazy? And I said, well, first of all, as an attorney, I know that especially in a criminal matter, you really shouldn't have a strong opinion until a trial has been conducted. There are certain things you can talk about, but the narrative that's being put forward by a number of commentators that you must believe Tyler Robinson is guilty or else you're demonic and you hate widows just doesn't hit me very well. So let's talk about all of the things that Candace Owens has questions about, and I'm sure I'm going to miss a couple things. I heard a great podcast by Lionel Nation, whom I suggest all of you listen to, because he is a former state prosecutor and really just a brilliant thinker. There's no two ways about it. And so in his talk, Lionel Nation had said that if a juror has a problem with one piece of significant evidence, that is enough for them to return a verdict of not guilty. So a juror can look at one piece of suspicious evidence, and that is enough reason for them to say, I have reasonable doubt. Now, here's another thing that the dick, Andrew Wilson, screwed up. When asked what percentage possibility did the two people have, Candace Owens and Andrew Wilson, about Tyler Robinson being guilty, Candace Owens said 0%. I put the chances at 0% based on the evidence I've seen. Andrew Wilson says, I put it at 75 to 85%. That is the very definition of reasonable doubt. So the dick, Andrew Wilson, is also a friggin' idiot because he doesn't understand that he just spent $300,000 to tell the whole goddamn world that if he was on the jury with Candace Owens, both of them would agree to acquit Tyler Robinson. Andrew Wilson might have just as well set that $300,000 on fire and burned it in front of Patrick Bet-David. So I thought I would just compile a short list of the things that Candace Owens, because she's actually read the court documents, watched the preliminary hearing, and apparently discussed it with real attorneys, to come up very quickly with a list of 10 things that there are problems with the evidence. Number one, the 30-06 bullet. What is going on with that? Was Charlie Kirk shot with a 30-06 bullet, which should have done much more damage than expected? Now, are there other possible explanations? Yes. Maybe it was a hollow point. Maybe it's not a 30-06 bullet. But in a court of law, you have to be able to link the evidence together. A reasonable chain of causation. There's a problem with the evidence, which is they said that the bullet that they recovered is inconclusive to it being fired from that 30-06 rifle, which was recovered. Now remember, this is not evidence that it is not the bullet, but by the same token, it isn't evidence that it is the bullet. There are problems like this sometimes in evidence. And so I'm not going to say this argues the case one way or another, but what is true is that this is problematic for the prosecution. Number one. Number two, the photos and video, which were supposed to be so clear that a whole bunch of influencers got up in front of the cameras after the preliminary hearing and said, these are so clear. We clearly saw Tyler Robinson doing this. Everything was correct. And apparently that's not true. So why are these influencers lying? Apparently, allegedly. Notice how careful I'm being with my language. If there is some clear pictures of Tyler Robinson, I'm happy to change my opinion. But so far, nothing like that has been shown. Also, there's some problems because we're told that Tyler Robinson carried that rifle up to the roof, stuffed in his pants, and then he reassembled it and put the sight on and then took the shot. Well, in what's been released of a fuzzy, out of focus figure, it doesn't seem like he does that. It seems like he just runs, drops, shoots, runs away. Where is the assembly of the rifle? Now, I'm not much of a gun guy, but I can listen to people, and it seems like the problem is also that there was a scope on the rifle, and apparently when you screw a scope in, it's not sighted accurately. And so the question is, well, if you unscrewed that rifle sight and then put it back on, it wouldn't be accurate. This guy just took one shot. Okay, that leads me into problem number 3. Now remember, Lionelation says a juror only needs one piece of significant evidence that has problems to have reasonable doubt. Here we are at number 3. There are multiple DNA samples on the rifle. And apparently, so I think the number is somewhere around 5, but the most degraded DNA on the rifle is from Tyler Robinson, which means that in a perfect world, this is what the evidence would mean, is that 4 other people handled that rifle more than Tyler Robinson. And as I understand the evidence, the greatest contributor to the DNA on the rifle is not Tyler Robinson. It is his roommate, Lance Twiggs. That's a problem. I'm not saying that if you explain it to me, that I might not accept, maybe I'll accept the explanation. You gotta explain it to me. Now, the text message confessions. I don't claim to know what Discord is, but I do understand this thing called time. And apparently, the claim that Candace Owens is making is that Tyler Robinson turned himself into the police at a specific time, and the message confessions came about an hour after Tyler Robinson turned himself in. So, do we think that Tyler Robinson, while in police custody, would be texting a confession to his lover, Lance Twiggs? Kind of problematic for me. Like I said, I don't know what the truth is. Reason number 5. Did Lance Twiggs have access to those Discord chats? Apparently, he did have access to them. What I think needs to be seen and has not been presented, which is why Candace Owens is so suspicious, is that the metadata should reveal where that message was sent from. So we might not be able to figure out if it was Lance Twiggs, but if we know Tyler Robinson is an ex-police station, and we know that Lance Twiggs is back home, and the texts originate from their home together, well, that would suggest it was Lance Twiggs. Reason number 6. Did I mention that Lionel Nation says we only need one significant piece of evidence to be suspicious to give us reasonable doubt? Number 6, the Utah court, in their preliminary hearing, can rely on what's called reasonable hearsay. I've never heard of that term before. Now, I didn't practice much criminal law. I worked for the U.S. Attorney's Office when I was in law school. But as I understand it, this is a really strange standard, and Utah is the only jurisdiction which has that rule. That's very concerning to me. It means that they can take a case that's an absolute dog and bring back and present it to a judge and put it for trial. So Candace Owens finds that to be suspicious. So do I. Reason number 7 for suspicion. Lance Twiggs, in his recorded interview, which was played at that preliminary hearing, says that he and his lover, Tyler Robinson, never talked about politics and never talked about Charlie Kirk. Well, I'm not sure all of the sexual stuff that's going on. We know that the two of them were gay lovers. We know that Lance Twiggs appeared to be a furry, something I don't quite understand. I'm sorry, I'm old. And there's a question of whether Lance Twiggs is transgender. I'm hearing alternate things, that he was just gay and a furry and not transgender. Still, this is unclear to me. And the only thing that I want to point out is that it seems that somebody who is going to commit the murder of somebody they've never met would tell the closest person in their life that maybe they have a couple problems with that person. Now, it may not go as far as saying, hey, on Tuesday, I'm going to kill this guy. But you would expect that they would at least have some discussion of it. Reason number 8. Charlie was critical of Israel before his death. He was very publicly and very privately critical of Israel. So this doesn't mean that Israel killed Charlie Kirk, but in any decent homicide investigation, the question always comes up, hey, who was the victim having problems with before they died? Charlie was having problems with Israel, the war in Gaza, and the looming war in Iran. So, any decent homicide investigator also knows that one of the most dangerous situations is where former friends or people in deep relationships suddenly have a break. Okay, because there's this expectation that, oh, this person was on my side, this was my wife, this was my husband, this was my business partner, I trusted them. If there's a blow up in a close relationship and then one of the parties ends up dead, that's reasonable suspicion. I'm not saying it's conclusive, but that's where your mind goes. Reason number 9. If we're to believe that Charlie was killed by a 30-odd 6 bullet, it doesn't make sense about that puff in his shirt. Now, what Candace Owens is suggesting is that there is, it may have been an exploding microphone, maybe like the exploding pagers that Israel used against the Hamas members. I don't know if that's true or not. None of you do either. But what I do know is there seems to be an anomaly with what happens to Charlie's shirt. I don't know what that puff is. And I need it explained. Really, I'm sitting here, I'm saying, if you want to give me an explanation for it that makes sense, I'm all ears. I want to hear it. Reason number 10 that Candace Owens has a problem with the Charlie Kirk assassination. The actions of Charlie's security team right after Charlie was shot. I don't know about you, but if my friend was shot dead in front of me, I wouldn't immediately be going to the cameras. I would immediately start trying to help my friends and probably freaking the hell out. I don't see any freaking the hell out in that video footage. In fact, it's fucking weird. I don't know what was up with those people. And I'm open. I'm open to any explanations. Tell me that's the way they were trained. Tell me that they were trained and they said, hey, look, I know if somebody is shot, your initial inclination is going to be to freak out. Well, you can't do that because that's not helpful. You need to do X, Y, and Z. If you can tell me that's part of the standard security training, okay, I'll change my mind. But I haven't heard that explanation given. And so these are the kinds of things that Andrew Wilson just got wrong. If you want to be an effective debater, you can't just disagree with good points from the other side. You have to take all of that into account and then give your counter. So now I'm going to give you my counter because I think that Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Lionel Nation, Alex Jones, who I've co-written 2 books with, Jimmy Dore, and a lot of people, there's an idea they're not considering. So I think back to the book that I did with Dr. Paul Alexander called Presidential Takedown. You can see that over my shoulder right there. So Dr. Paul Alexander was the senior pandemic advisor during about the first six months of the COVID lockdowns. I think he started in April. The lockdown started in March. He lasted until September. So 5, maybe 6 months. So during the course of my interviews with Dr. Paul Alexander, he noted all of the various recommendations that he was making to the Trump administration, and others were as well, specifically Dr. Robert Redfield, and how they weren't being followed. And I said to him, well, if you were Trump's guy, why wasn't Trump accepting your advice? And why was he accepting Fauci's advice? And his response to me was, well, we suspected that Trump had been threatened by the intelligence agencies, either against him directly or his children. And I said, okay, you were at the very center of our government. Can you tell me whether those fears were valid or not valid? And his response to me was no. So I'm not telling you that Trump or his family were threatened if they didn't go along with the COVID madness. All I can tell you is that the people who should have known the answer to that question couldn't give me an answer. So let me just make a hypothesis. I've heard Candace Owens get very angry over the fact that Charlie Kirk was very close to President Trump, was really close to Donald Trump Jr., and they don't seem to care much about these unanswered questions about the Charlie Kirk assassination. Here's my really deep and dark hypothesis. My deep and dark hypothesis is that even if you're the president of the United States, you don't know who's on your side and who wants to kill you. Even if they take a shot from you from the roof of a building in Butler, Pennsylvania, you know that you're not going to be able to find out what was really going on. So I think of Trump sitting there going, I know somebody took a shot at me. And then he goes to his golf club and somebody tries to take a shot at him there. Somebody who had been working to recruit fighters for Ukraine. So I envision the people in the Trump administration who are in the know saying to themselves, okay, we know they came for us. We have suspicions about who did it, but we can't prove it. They know they're going to have to move quietly. They're going to have to move in the shadows. They're going to have to assemble their evidence, and they may never present it. But those who were behind those assassination attempts may meet with unfortunate ends. Ends that should never be linked back to the president. So, if that's what you do for your own family, I suspect that's what you would do if your friend was assassinated. So I have no proof of this, but my suspicion is that those in our government who are the good guys know that there are some hidden bad guys, but they're not quite sure who they are. So they're not going to panic everybody. They're just going to let it go on. Now, this will be very distressing to those who were friends of Charlie Kirk. But let me just talk about two other interviews that I found very interesting, because these are people who I know are good-hearted, or I believe are good-hearted, and I think they're genuinely trying to get to the bottom of things. So I watched an interview with Jimmy Dore and Joe Kent, who was head of the National Counterterrorism office. And he famously resigned before the Iran war. And he's come out and said things like investigation into foreign influence and the Charlie Kirk assassination had been shut down. I think that's accurate. So somebody like Joe Kent may not know everything that's going on. He may not know who's actually being deployed to find out who's responsible for Charlie Kirk's assassination. It was interesting in his discussion with Jimmy Dore that Joe Kent was saying Trump is clearly intelligent. He clearly understands all of these things. And in order to get control over these intelligence agencies, people who will bring the intelligence agencies to heel. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, you're the guy. You're the guy that Trump put in charge. And you're saying he needs to put somebody in charge who understands the intelligence agencies? He put fucking you in charge. What are you doing here saying, oh, Trump needs to appoint good people? Well, he appointed you. It made no sense to me. And all I could think of is something isn't adding up here. There's something I don't understand. I don't understand how Joe Kent can go on Jimmy Dore and say, well, you know, what Trump needs to do is he needs to appoint good people to ride roughshod over the intelligence agencies. And Joe Kent was one of those people. So what the hell is going on? Something doesn't add up in the Joe Kent story. And I don't quite know what it is, but I know what bothers me. Okay. So then I move to the last interview I want to talk about, which is Glenn Beck talking with Michael Knowles. Now, Michael Knowles famously, he works with the Daily Wire. Yeah, he's good friends with Ben Shapiro. He's also godfather to one of Candace Owens' kids. I've been on with Michael Knowles for like a 5 or 6 minute segment. He seems like a nice guy. I had a nice little talk with him. We share the same birthday, so we're kind of birthday twins. And I've always really liked Michael's sort of low-key style. But he's talking to Glenn Beck about things, and you know, Michael is trying to understand what's going on with the war in Iran. And so Glenn Beck did something that I thought was just wonderful, and it makes me quite interested in hopefully someday having a conversation with Glenn Beck. He has talked about one of my books on his program. He talked about my book, Google Leaks, with Zach Voorhees, because we found that Glenn Beck was one of the people who'd been blacklisted from appearing in Google searches. So I think that's a pretty critical thing. But what Glenn Beck was saying was, I thought really great, which was he said, you know, when Trump came in the first time, he said, okay, I need to fix some things. We got some leaky pipes, so I'll wrap up the pipes. And then he was expecting that he'd have a second term right after his first term, and he could get to work more deeply on these things. And then 2020 election came around, he got kicked out, and he didn't get back in until 2024. Well, at that point, he looked at the edifice of our government and he said, oh my God, this is like a house that needs a major renovation. And so he's fixing a lot of shit. One of the pieces of shit that he's fixing is the Strait of Hormuz. And the problem is that because of its geography, Iran has a forever choke point in the Strait of Hormuz. So the question is, how do you take away the choke point? Well, what you do is you send a bunch of ships there. You kind of have like a wall of steel. You degrade their capacity to do things. And at the same time, you create these overland pipelines so that by the time the Trump administration ends, well, the Strait of Hormuz is no longer a choke point. What you've also done, because of what's happened in Venezuela, and it appears like it's happening in Cuba, is that the balance of power really shifts back to the United States. So China, Russia, Iran cannot screw around with us. And if you've ever been through a house remodel, and it looks like I'm heading into that because we have a little bit of a mold problem, your life sucks during it. You hate the contractors, you hate everybody who's working on it. But after it's done, you understand what they were doing. So, is Trump doing a remodel of the global system of power? And it's messy, and it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to people, even good people, because all of the people I mentioned, except for Andrew Wilson, I think of as just great people. If you told me I got to spend, go to dinner with these people, I would love it. I would consider it one of the highlights of my life. So, all of these people, Candace Owens, Lionel Nation, Alex Jones, Jimmy Dore, I love you to death. I think there's something you haven't considered. And so, being respectful, following my 3 rules, I'm just saying, I think there's another idea you might want to consider. So, in a situation where the information is unclear, maybe the best thing you can do is be open to the idea that maybe things are being done, they're just not being talked about. So that's all I have for you today. Hopefully, this is not the best part of your day, listening to a brilliant, handsome man like myself. But hopefully, the best part of your day is talking to people in your world and being a good human being. All right. Thanks a lot. Talk to you later. Bye bye.